It forces you to stay up to date and learn a lot. And so it's got that double benefit of not only gaining a little bit of attention inside of the industry, but it does force you to learn more about what's going on and not just stick with the status quo. So I would say that's probably even a bigger benefit, is just your own personal development and understanding of the industry, especially as a younger person who doesn't have 10, 15 years of experience under my belt yet. Sadly, I'm getting closer and closer to that the older I get, but it's a huge way to stay accountable and make sure you're up to date on what's going on.
Hey scientists, how are you doing? Welcome to the Smart Biotech Scientist podcast. Today we have a treat for all you cell and gene therapy enthusiasts out there. Joining us is Benjamin McLeod, a familiar face to many of you from his insightful coverage of cell and gene therapy on LinkedIn. Ben currently works with Nanomosaic, an innovative analytical device company. With his unique position at the crossroads of R&D, marketing, and business development, Ben brings a multifaceted perspective to our discussion. Today, we'll dive into some fascinating topics, including the art of communicating science, the potential impact of AI on the cell and gene therapy space, and Ben's prediction for the biggest changes coming to the field over the next decade. So grab your coffee, settle in, and get ready for some biotech insights that might just transform your approach to biologics development. Are you juggling the complexities of CMC development while trying to enjoy the beauty of biotech? Have you ever wondered if there's a way to simplify bioprocessing? Welcome to the Smart Biotech Scientist podcast, where we're diving headfirst into the very challenges you face. We're breaking it down, demystifying the jargon, and giving you the keys to unlock your full potential. I'm your host, David Brolman, and I get it. With 15 plus years in the biotech industry, I face the same challenges you do. There's a way to simplify and streamline so you can remove complexity, you can skip trials and errors, deliver without delay your groundbreaking therapy to clinics and market, and still enjoy every single step. Do you want to learn how industry experts and I did it? Grab a cup of coffee and your favorite notebook and pen. Now is the time to take your bioprocessing game to the next level. Let's smarten up biotech. Hey Ben, welcome to the podcast. I have been looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Ben, share something that you believe about bioprocess development that most people disagree with.
Good question. Probably this is going to sound a little bit generic, but I don't think enough people are good at talking about it. Where there's lots of really interesting stuff that's occurring in the field, and there's lots of different silos that are occurring inside of the field where people in different silos aren't really talking to each other. There's not a lot of really good marketing around how to make other people aware of what's going on. And since people are usually inside of their own little bubble, there's not that understanding of how it can potentially integrate into other parts of bioprocess development. And so I think there's a really powerful opportunity there to ensure that people who are doing really valuable work in different parts of the field can better start to collaborate with each other. Hopefully that's controversial enough.
Yeah, I agree. We as scientists need to learn to communicate and to sell what we're doing. You mentioned also the magic word collaboration. I think definitely that's a game changer. We're going to talk more about communicating science, but before we do that, let's talk about yourself, Ben, because many say that in science, breakthroughs often come from unexpected places. So I'm curious, what was the unconventional moment or surprising insight that first drew you into the world of biotech? And how did you get from there to your current role at Nanomosaic?
Sure. I guess for a lot of people would be able to relate with going through your undergrad and not really having a clear view of what's going to happen after. And so that's kind of what happened for me. I was doing my undergrad. I had grand aspirations when I went in of being an optometrist, given that I'm a lifelong customer there with glasses, and quickly came to the realization and the understanding that I was not smart enough to get into the very limited number of seats that were available per year inside of Canada. There's only one ophthalmology school. And so there's 120 seats and you're competing with a lot of people that are smarter than I. So my grades weren't what they needed to be in the first couple of years of university, so I had to bid those dreams farewell. But the further I got into my undergrad, the more I became just fascinated with the biology that I was studying. But again, the question is, what do you do with that after you're done? You can work in a lab, and that's about all that you learn you can do with it when you're in university. And so I happened to meet someone that was friends with my fiance, and he had just taken this Master of Biotech program. So I wasn't sure what I was going to be doing after my undergrad, was trying to figure out how to put my life together. And he recommended this program. And he said, as someone who has a very strong skill set in technical stuff that you've been learning the last 4 years, the biotech program kind of gives you a bit of a wider perspective and some of those additional skills inside of the business side of science that can be extremely useful. And so I was able to get into that program. And what I ended up discovering was that I had never really learned much about the gene therapy, cell therapy side of things before. And part of that program was an internship where you could work at a bunch of different labs or biotech companies. And one of them happened to be in gene therapy. And so the more I looked into it, the more I was like, whoa, this is really cool. This is not something I really learned anything about when I was in my undergrad. You know, you're just kind of taking basic cell biology without the translational component of it. And so it was really fascinating. I managed to secure an internship for that back in early 2020. And lo and behold, as we are now all very familiar with, a bunch of in-person activities got canceled. So that lab that I was going to be working with doing gene therapy development got canceled. So I ended up doing a slightly different market analysis, business development internship for a biotech company in Toronto, here in Canada. But I was still really fascinated by the gene therapy side of it. And it was something I was just looking at more and more. I was like, man, I wish I could get into that. And then my internship comes to an end in the summer of 2020. And the original lab at the University of Guelph, where I was studying, reached back out and they said, hey, we know the internship never worked out, but as it turns out, we need someone in the lab. Would you like to work in the lab doing gene therapy production? And so me, being a graduate student who was freshly released from school, pretty much broke with no strong job prospects in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, was quite thankful to have someone who was interested in me and was offering me a job. So I took that, did that for about a year and a half. It was a very enriching experience that got me my first set of skills inside of the gene therapy industry. And in terms of where that's led to today, where I kind of settled on was I love talking about the science. I love working around the science, getting excited about the science, learning about new developments in the field, not necessarily cut out for lab work the rest of my life. And so ever since, I've been able to work at various positions where, again, I'm kind of the lab guy who understands the science, who can sit between the R&D folks and the marketing / sales people and kind of get those two groups talking and make sure that the value of one team is conveyed to the other and vice versa. So it's been a lot of fun. And when you kind of attach LinkedIn on top of that, it allows you to even more supercharge the connection of various different opportunities and learn about new technology in a really fascinating way. So it's been really fun so far.
Wow, that's really fascinating. What a journey. And what I see, it's not a linear journey as for many scientists. And now you even became a curator of cell and gene therapy science and analytical insights on LinkedIn. That's, by the way, how I discovered you. So what inspired you to start creating regular LinkedIn posts about this exciting field in the cell and gene therapy?
Yeah, good question. So once I finished up my gene therapy production job, my first job inside of the industry was for a company called Biotech. And they hired me as a technical business development associate again, the lab guy who understands the science, who kind of sits in between the two groups. And so even as a business development associate, I didn't have any quota associated with my job. Again, my job was to help out the BD focused individuals and be that technical resource on calls and whatnot. But the challenge I kind of found with myself in the first couple months there is, although I was doing work that was valuable, I wasn't in the lab advancing the science of the company. I wasn't strictly a BD person who was bringing in revenue. I was just kind of in the middle between those two teams. And I was trying to think, is there some sort of unique value that I can provide to the organization in this role beyond what I've been hired to do? And what I arrived on was LinkedIn, kind of becoming ideally some sort of subject matter expert, thinking about how can I provide value to other people inside of cell and gene therapy. Can I provide papers? Can I provide different posts that would be useful to people? Something that you couldn't just quickly Google, something that would involve a little bit of work. And maybe one day, by doing these different posts and whatnot, I'd be able to get some leads for the company, and it might translate into some opportunities for the company. And so I started doing that. I started out very simply. I figured I'd do a meme per week, a science meme per week. And they mostly got pity likes from the other people in the office. They weren't the most stellar or amazing posts in the world, but it was a start. And probably one of the first breakthroughs I got was after a couple months of doing that, I decided in addition to this one kind of funny post I was doing per week, I would find a recent paper in cell and gene therapy, read it through, analyze it, figure out what the most important takeaways from that were, upload the PDF onto LinkedIn, and then just provide those insights in the caption of the post. And those actually took off fairly well from the get-go. Again, a lot of people inside of the cell and gene therapy space are busy people inside the lab trying to do their 9-to-5 job, and they don't have that bandwidth to be constantly scouring the literature for what the newest developments are. And so I kind of just happened upon it by accident. This was a way by which I could provide a little bit of unique value that no one else was really filling the gap for at that time. And from there, it just kind of snowballed into more and more posts talking about different components of the industry. And eventually, and it's still kind of crazy to this day, as a result of that, people get to know you. They get to trust you a little bit. They see that you know what you're talking about. And as a result, eventually some leads did start to come in for the company because people knew my face. And every once in a while, I would talk about what the company does and the problems that we solve. People would reach out and would be interested. And so by the time I moved on to my next job, this was a significant source of new leads for the company, which was just absolutely nuts. So it just again speaks to the power of being someone who's useful, especially in the age of social media where the algorithm doesn't care if it's showing your post to a lab tech or to the CEO of a biotech company. As long as you've got something that's useful and helpful, and it's nicely formatted and it's designed to assist the understanding of the person who's reading it, LinkedIn will show it to anybody. And so it's a really powerful way to build credibility and trust with people that you would otherwise have no chance in a million years of meeting.
What I love, Ben, is that you're providing value. You started out with summarizing a paper and then just providing that value to busy scientists. And at the same time, what I love also is you're not only providing value, you're also learning. I mean, it's a great way to learn and to be up to date on what's going on in the industry.
Absolutely. That's the other huge benefit. Because I'm forcing myself to read 1 or 2 papers a week and summarize them, it's hugely helpful for my own knowledge and understanding and staying up to date. The one kind of helps the other, where the one helps you build credibility, but at the same time, it forces you to remain credible. It forces you to stay up to date and learn a lot. And so it's got that double benefit of not only gaining a little bit of attention inside of the industry, but it does force you to learn more about what's going on and not just stick with the status quo. So I would say that's probably even a bigger benefit is just your own personal development and understanding of the industry, especially as a younger person who doesn't have 10, 15 years of experience under my belt yet. Sadly, I'm getting closer and closer to that the older I get, but it's a huge way to stay accountable and make sure you're up to date on what's going on.
Now, it's not a secret that a lot of scientists struggle with communication. It's not necessarily a skill that we learn during our studies. Now, let's look at the most common misconceptions people have when trying to explain complex scientific concepts. What are your thoughts about that?
I've got a bit of a controversial take here. I think the way that academia is set up, it doesn't prioritize clarity and understanding for a wide audience. And the reason for that is if you imagine you've got someone who does a master's, PhD, postdoc, the only time they're ever talking about their science is around other peers in the field who are also in that very specific niche of science. That's not reality. That is an artificial environment. You are the foremost expert in this area, and you're around other people who are also foremost experts in that area. For everyone else inside of biotech, that just isn't the case. There might be another 15, 20 people who are deep in the weeds like you are. But if you're not capable of taking a bit of a larger step back and tying your research into the wider milieu of your specific industry, then you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. And unfortunately, that's the way that is incentivized within academia, right? Because the only time you ever present your research, the only time you ever talk about it is around other people who have the same degree of understanding as you do. And often, I've been in this situation, and perhaps you have too, when you do a presentation, you usually get the tar beaten out of you, right? It's like, oh, why did you do that t-test wrong? It's this obsession on like tiny little details that kind of force you to even more focus on the details and not take that wider picture. It's like, why didn't you do that t-test? Why did this experiment fail? Critiquing small ways that you did a certain process. And again, it forces you to go the opposite direction of wider understanding and tying it into the larger environment and the larger industry. And so with regards to that, I think one of the very important things to remember is that if you can explain what you do to your mother or to a grandmother or to a friend who's not in the industry, if you can do that, that's a really good way to kind of push yourself the other way. And a really powerful tool in doing that is analogies. Relate whatever you're doing to tangible objects or situations that other people can relate to. And again, that's not something that's ever taught. And so being able to explain that to friends or to family members who aren't in the industry is a really good way to start. And if they can't understand what you're doing, then I wouldn't say that's so much a problem with them. It might be a problem with you in trying to find better analogies to better explain what you're doing. And one additional thought on that as well is if you're like a PhD student or you're a postdoc or something like that, and you're in a university setting, a great way to actually get paid to hone these types of scientific communication skills is go offer tutoring to first year or second year biology students. These are people who don't have anything beyond like a grade 12 level understanding of biology, and they're incentivized to learn. They want to learn. But your job is to help convey the complexity of the science so that they can do well in the course. And so it's a great way to kind of try to different analogies and different ways of explaining the science to see what resonates really, really well. Because again, you're getting paid by them. So if your explanation doesn't work, you got to start over again because you're getting paid by them. There's a couple different ways you can do that.
As you said, well, Ben, one way is by analogies. Like, what other advice can you give scientists, very talented scientists who just struggle to communicate it, to break it down and explain it in simple terms?
One other thing I've found to be very effective in the last couple of years that I've been doing LinkedIn is to always explain something in the context of a wider problem or a pain point. And so, for example, let's say you're working on some very discrete mechanism of cancer biology. Talk to people, first of all, about cancer, kind of set the stage. There's a specific type of cancer that I'm looking at. Let's say, for example, it's liver cancer. Talk a little bit about how many people are struggling with that, like how many cases there are across the world. And then you can kind of get into the weeds of, okay, the specific protein that I'm looking at inside of the liver deals with regulating some sort of function. Maybe it helps keep cells from multiplying like crazy. You just need to start a little bit higher up and gradually work your way down to where your problem is. And ideally, each time that you're making that step down, you're still keeping, your audience is still keeping track to where you're working at. If you just start here, no one understands. You've got to slowly bring them down through the levels of understanding so that they can truly appreciate what you're working on. And so often it's just like, we've all seen the paper titles that just immediately start with this very weird random molecular pattern, and that's the title of the paper. And there might be like one line in the abstract about why this is relevant, but it doesn't do enough to dress the stage. So just really taking your time to make sure your audience understands the wider context before you dive into the nitty-gritty, so that they're equipped to understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, this reminds me of Start with the Why by Simon Sinek. I mean, often as scientists, we fail to give the broader perspective. Actually, why does it matter? I've seen so many presentations where they talk about this amazing mass spec, but actually, why is it amazing and why does it matter? So it's a really important question to answer. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the cell and gene therapy space, I have another question about LinkedIn. Out of curiosity, what are the elements that make a LinkedIn post truly engaging and shareable?
A huge part of it is those first 3 lines that you're doing on your post. It can't be about you. It can't be super specific. It's got to be something that, as someone is scrolling along their phone or on their laptop, something that captures their attention quite quickly. Too often what I'll see is just, you've got those first 3 lines that people can see at the top of your post, and it's just 3 lines. It's just a wall of text. And so you can't quickly browse it in that split second before you decide to scroll or stop. And so if you can utilize short sentences that get to the point, that talk about why your post is important specifically to them, that's a huge leg up. And a really good way to do that is to quickly start with what the problem is, and then use a but statement. So problem, but what? So, it could be bioprocessing doesn't get enough AAV yield, but this new innovation promises to change that. Now you've got a little bit of a hook that kind of has quickly helped people gauge if this is something that's relevant to them, as opposed to just a wall of text that's just kind of starting with those technical details, right? You're actually starting at the high level and you're making it relevant to everyone, coming one level lower down to talk about what the specific solution is or what the insight is that you're providing, and then going from there. So yeah, really try to start with either like a problem or a pain point or some sort of strong statement that makes your post relevant, so that someone actually is going to stop for that extra second and a half to see if it's relevant to them.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing this very practical insights. Hey, smart biotech scientists. I hope you have been enjoying our conversation with Benjamin McLeod. Ben is a curator of cell and gene therapy science and analytical insights on LinkedIn, and he is a director at Nanomosaic. And in part 2, dropping this Thursday, we are continuing our conversation, and we're going to be talking about the potential impact of AI on the cell and gene therapy space, and Ben's prediction for the biggest changes coming to the field over the next decade. What did you think about today's episode? Please tell us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you're listening to, because your review means the world to me. So I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you on Thursday. All right, smart scientists. That's all for today on the Smart Biotech Scientist podcast. Thank you for tuning in and joining us on your journey to bioprocess mastery. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. By doing so, we can empower more scientists like you. For additional bioprocessing tips, visit us at smartbiotechscientist.com. Stay tuned for more inspiring biotech insights in our next episode. Until then, let's continue to smarten up biotech.